our series, I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I can't wait to learn about today's crazy story. Before we get started, I have a question for you. Have you ever been asked to do something that made no sense at all? Maybe it was by your parents or by your teacher or maybe by me, but they asked you to do something that made no sense to you whatsoever. Well, it's one thing when our parents or our teacher asks us to do something that doesn't make sense, but it's another thing when God asks us to do something that doesn't make sense. Today we're learning a crazy story about a man who was asked to do some pretty crazy stuff by God. First, I want you to check out this video about our story.
Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting edition of I Know It Sounds Crazy, but It's True. My name's Josh, and like always, if it's weird, if it's wacky, if it's bizarre, and it's in the Bible, we're going to talk about it. I'm ready to go. What about you guys? Let's kick the tires and light the fires.
I am overjoyed!
It's party time.
I haven't been paying attention, but whatever.
Let's just get this over with. Now, in today's lesson, we're talking about a judge.
Order in the court?
I'll have a cheeseburger. No, not that kind of judge. We're talking about the book of Judges, in the Bible.
That makes more sense.
Now, you may have heard of some of these judges before, like Samson. The big strong guy that hated haircuts.
I hope you brought your sewing kit because I'm ripped.
Something like that. The judges were men and women that God picked to lead the Israelites during tough times. Every judge was really brave.
Ah, look at me, so brave.
Except for one, Gideon. Gideon was a huge scaredy cat. What was that?
Can I have it?
No, he wasn't a cat person.
Well, that's boring.
But he was afraid. In fact, when we first meet Gideon, he's hiding. But an angel of the Lord shows up and says to him,
Greetings, mighty warrior!
To which Gideon replied, This guy? A mighty warrior? Seriously? If he's a mighty warrior, I'm a giant rooster.
That can be arranged.
Quiet, you. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. The Israelites were under control of an evil empire called the Midianites. And God chose Gideon, the scaredy cat, to lead the Israelites against them. That don't make no sense. And it didn't make sense to Gideon either. So Gideon asked the angel for a sign to prove that he was really from God.
Like this one. Hello, I am from God.
Now it's a bit weirder than that. First, the angel made fire come out of a rock.
Fire is my favorite!
Fire from a rock is pretty cool, but it wasn't enough for Gideon the scaredy cat. So he got a fleece, sheep's wool, laid it on the ground, and told the angel that if the next day the ground was dry, but the sheep's wool was wet, then he would believe. Well, the next morning, it happened. And hallelujah, Gideon finally believed. No. Oh, come on, get with the program, you yellow-bellied. Calm down. The next day, Gideon asked for the opposite to happen. He wanted the ground to be wet and the fleece to be dry. And the next morning, it was. This is the weirdest, most random story I've ever heard.
I like it.
As weird as it was finally enough proof for Gideon. So the angel told Gideon to gather up an army and go to battle against the Midianites.
Battle!
But what do you think happens next? Is Gideon going to chicken out? Will he stop being scared? Will he trust God even though it doesn't make sense? Find out today in your lesson. You know what time it is. Oh, no you don't. Last time you turned me into a dinosaur.
I won't this time.
Do you promise?
Why, certainly.
Why do I suddenly want corn?
That's messed up.
Well, Gideon sure didn't seem like a mighty warrior, did he? And what in the world was it with all those crazy fleeces? To wonder if God was actually doing what was best? He surely didn't trust God's crazy plan. Well, we're going to learn all about what happened in Gideon's story today, and it gets a little bit crazier. If you think that it's been crazy so far, just wait. But right now we need to we need to check in with our friend Disco Dave to find out what our What You Gotta Know is.
What's happening, you crazy cats? It's me, Disco Dave, and I'm here to tell you what you gotta know. Today, we're talking about obeying God even when it don't make sense. So today, every time somebody asks you what you gotta know, you tell them, I don't get it, that's okay, I'm gonna obey anyway. Sometimes God asks us to do some far out stuff. It just don't make sense. But we gotta obey God anyway.
Disco Dave, I need you to trust me.
For sure, God. I'll trust you no matter what. And that's what you should do too. Trust and obey God even when it don't make sense. So today, every time somebody asks you what you gotta know, you tell them, I don't get it. That's okay. I'm gonna obey anyway. That right there is what you gotta know. I'm Disco Dave saying, Dynamite!
Well, Disco Dave trusts God. We are going to do the same thing. We're also going to learn our power verse for today. So we're going to watch the video for the power verse right now.
And some salt. A little sweet. Oh, hey, boys and girls. It's me, Terry Yaki. And I was just cooking up something tasty for my restaurant. Nice rice. It's a 5-star fine dining establishment that's famous for, you guessed it, my rice. Hard to mess that up. Now today, I'm also cooking up a very special power verse. The trouble is, I'm famous for getting things mixed up. Eggs aren't the only thing I scramble. I mix up the ingredients, the names of our dishes, and even the power verse. So I'm gonna need your help unscrambling the whole thing today. So let's look at it together. If 14:15 love me, obey my John. Commandments you. Yes, this is wrong. Very mixed up. Kind of like the time I made an apple pie with an Apple iPad. Customers complained it was too crunchy. I don't know. Kind of weird. Anyway, boys and girls, I'm going to need your help getting this one unscrambled. Let's look at it together. If 14:15 love me, what in the world are these numbers for? Oh, of course. We'll move them over for now. If blank love me, obey my John. Well, that can only mean one of two things. We're supposed to obey a talking toilet, or the book of the Bible is out of place. Which do you think? Yep, I think we should move John over too. Let's try it again. If blank love me, obey my blank, commandments you. Aha! I think I found our two blanks. Let's put them in the right place. Commandments probably goes here. And you probably goes over here. So what do you think the scripture reference is? Yep, John 14:15. Yes, that's it. I think we have it. Now, stand with me and say it loud on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. If you love me, obey my commandments. John 14:15. That's a great power verse. Now, let's make sure we really know it so when we need to remember it later, it's not all mixed up in our brains. Stand up and say it loud on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. If you love me, Obey my commandments. John 14:15. Great job, boys and girls. Now, I've got to get back to making my spaghetti. Now, where did I put my pudding? Well, until next time, this is Teriyaki saying, ladles up.
All right, boys and girls, did everybody get your power verse? Let's say it one more time. If you love me, obey my commandments. John 14:15. We are going to start our story now. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. Remember, you're what you gotta know. I don't get it. That's okay. I'm gonna obey anyway. Oh, I almost forgot. We're gonna play a game. You all know how to play Simon Says, right? You know, if Simon says it, you have to do it. But if Simon doesn't say it, you don't do it. If you do it when Simon didn't say, then you're out and you can sit down. So we're going to start. Miss Bethany's going to call out some of our Simon Says instructions. And I have some guests that are going to play with us. So you all play along. Are you ready? Let's go.
Simon says, touch your head. Simon says, shake your knees. Simon says, spin in a circle. Simon says, stop. Simon says, stop shaking your knees. Simon says, stop shaking your head, touching your head. Jump! Simon didn't say to jump.
Okay. All right. We're going to move on. If you enjoyed Simon Says and you want to play some more at your house, you can take turns with your brothers and sisters or involve your mom or dad and play some more Simon Says. But right now, we're going to move on to our next slide. Our Bible story. We already learned a little bit about Gideon, right? We learned that God gave him this plan, and he didn't think he was a mighty warrior, and so he kept questioning God, and so he put out a fleece, and he said, you know, if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, then I'll believe you. And then he put out a fleece and said, if the fleece is dry but the ground is wet, I'll believe you. And God made those things happen. So Gideon agreed, and he was going to do what God wanted him to do. So, Gideon was a farmer. And remember that Gideon was in hiding at the beginning of our story because he was afraid of the Midianites. And they were pretty mean guys. They were the enemies of the Israelites. And Israelites were God's chosen people. The Midianites would sometimes come and invade the Israelites' farms and steal all their crops and food. So Gideon hid in a wine press where they stepped on the grapes. They made wine in this wine press because he was afraid. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Mighty warrior? Doesn't look very much like a mighty warrior to me. The angel told Gideon that God wanted him to lead the army of Israel into battle to defeat the Midianites. Gideon argued for a while because, he's hiding from Midianites. He doesn't want to fight them. God's call to lead his people into victory didn't make sense to him. It made no sense at all. So Gideon put out a call for all the fighting men of Israel to meet him so he could put together an army to defeat the Midianites. He looked out at this army of 32,000 men and he thought, maybe we can do this after all. But then God told Gideon, "You have way too many men for me to deliver Midian into your hands." Too many men? Are you kidding me? How can you have too many men for a battle? The more men, the better. What God was saying made no sense at all. Gideon told all the men who were scared, "Go ahead and go home." And 22,000 of the men left. Now he only had 10,000 men to fight against the Midianite army. As if things couldn't get worse, God told him there were still too many men. God then told Gideon to let the men go down to the water and get a drink. Well, that's an interesting plan. Let's go get a drink. he had told them that the men who drank the water by scooping it up with their hands, that they should be the ones to go into battle. What? Does that make sense? Is that a good way to choose who your army is? Choosing an army, how some of it based on how they drank water, whether they scooped it with their hands or whether they put their face down and drank it. But Gideon obeyed. Then it got really crazy. God told Gideon to take the 300 men who were left, and he gave them each a jar and a torch and a trumpet. I think we have a trumpet somewhere. We have a jar. See, we have a jar and our torch. Whoa. Oh, there we go. And we have a trumpet. He instructed Gideon to have his army surround the whole camp of the Midianites. Hold up the jars and the torches and blow the trumpets. Oh, that's loud. What a crazy battle plan. How is that supposed to make them defeat the Midianites? That doesn't make sense at all. But Gideon obeyed. Gideon and the men reached the edge of the camp. They blew their trumpets. They broke the jars. And they lit the torches. And then the weirdest thing happened. The Midianites woke up from sleep, and they were so confused by the lights that were surrounding their camp and the noise of the trumpets. They ended up defeating themselves. They were so confused, they just fought themselves. And the Israelites didn't have to do anything. Gideon obeyed even though it didn't make sense. In your lesson today, you will learn what to do even when God doesn't make sense. When you don't understand, you must still obey. Okay, I think we're done with the trumpet for now. We're going to put the torch away. And we're going to move on. So, we learned the power verse, if you love me, obey my commandments. And we know that Gideon did just that. I say, God, are you sure you can use me? Today we learned it was crazy. And sometimes God tells us to do things that we don't understand. And Gideon didn't think that he was able to be used by God. And so we sometimes have to ask the same question. God, are you sure you can use me? Remember when God told Gideon to lead his army? Gideon argued with him. He said, Lord, how can I save Israel? My family is the weakest, and I'm the weakest in my family. He was saying, God, are you sure you have the right guy? We do the same thing sometimes. God might tell us to do something, and we think, God, are you sure you have the right person? I am small. I'm young. I'm the youngest of my family, or I'm not very strong. We think we are too weak to do what God wants us to do. But God says, I will be with you. That's what he said to Gideon, and that's what he says to us. You don't have to worry. When God tells you to do something, it may not make sense, but he is asking you to do it. He's not asking you to do it by yourself. He's not asking you to do it in your strength. He's not asking you to do it because you're big. He will be with you. Isn't that awesome? Still, sometimes that isn't enough for us. We don't focus on how big God is. We focus on how big the enemy is. Think about the Midianites and how many big, mean people there were. Sometimes we see the same thing. We say, God, the enemy is too big. We look at our problems and we think that they are too big. And they are for us. But God says something to us. He says, I am bigger. We might not be bigger, but God is. That's what God was trying to get through to Gideon. Gideon didn't need 32,000 men. He didn't even need 10,000 men. All he needed was for God to be on his side, because God could take care of the enemy all by himself. He gave him some crazy instructions, which Gideon obeyed, but God is the one who won the battle. God is bigger than your fear. He is bigger than the bully at school. He's bigger than sickness. He's bigger than being locked in our houses over the coronavirus. God is bigger than any enemy that we have. Never forget that. There's one final lesson we need to learn from the Bible story. I say, God, this just doesn't make sense. Remember how God told Gideon to do things that didn't make sense. And yet God used those things, the blowing of the trumpet, the breaking of the jars, the flame, to confuse the enemy. All Gideon and the army had to do was to obey God. We are only using our tiny human brains, but God is the source of all wisdom in the universe. He knows what he's talking about. God says, I am God. God's ways may not make sense to us, but God knows what he is doing. He created the world. He knows the future. He created you. He created me. We have to do just like Gideon and say, I don't get it, but that's okay. I'm going to obey God anyway. All right, this week, I want you to remember the story of Gideon and what we learned and how we learned that Gideon obeyed God. And no matter what happens this week, I want you to obey God with whatever he says. I almost forgot to do our rewind questions. Are you ready to answer them? Everybody look at the screen. What you got to know today? God is bigger. I don't get it. That's okay. I'm going to obey anyway. Or I'm confused. Everybody pick your answer. You're right. I don't get it. That's okay. I'm going to obey God anyway. What is the name of the unlikely hero in today's Bible story? Is it Gideon, Gabe, or Gil? Everybody have an answer? I know you know it. It is Gideon. Question number 3. Where was Gideon hiding when the angel visited him? In a wagon, in a wine press, or in the garden? I bet everybody knows. He hiding in the wine press. Number 4. How many men ended up being in Gideon's army? 3, 30, or 300? You ready with your answer? 300 is correct. What 3 weapons did God tell Gideon to use? A jar, a candle, a trumpet, a cup, a lamp, and a tuba, or a jaguar, a cat, and a tiger? I know you know. It is the jar, the candle, and the trumpet. Number 6. When I say, God, are you sure you can use me? God says, I will blank blank you. What is it? I will always use you, I will be with you, or I will come hug you. You know what the answer is? Be with you. You are correct. When I say, God, the enemy is too big, God says, I am better, I am cooler, or I am bigger. You have the answer? It is, I am bigger. Question number 8. When I say, God, this doesn't make sense, God says, I am God. I know that, or I don't care. He says, I am God. Question number 9. I went back. Question number 9. Is God's wisdom greater than our wisdom? Everybody knows this. Yes or no? The answer is yes. Question number 10. Last question. Where was our power verse found? Was it John 14:15, Paul 4:5, or Philippians 15:14? Ready with your answer? The answer is John 14:15. All right, it was great to see you guys today. See you next week.